आपका स्वागत है। ये 6:30 बजे इसलिए नहीं शुरू हो पाया कि लोग 6:30 बजे ही चाय पीने आए और आतिथ्य के नाते ये अभद्रता होती अगर मैं उनसे कहता कि आप देर से आए हैं इसलिए चलिए सीधे। आप जानते ही हैं कि रज़ा फाउंडेशन हमारे शीर्ष स्थानीय चित्रकार सैयद हैदर रज़ा द्वारा स्थापित और पोषित संस्थान है और हमने पिछले वर्ष 7 मूर्धन्यों की स्मृति में वार्षिक व्याख्यान मालाएं शुरू की। अज्ञेय उनमें से एक हैं। इसके अलावा कुमार गंधर्व, हबीब तनवीर, मणि कौल, केलुचरण महापात्र, दया कृष्ण, कुमार गंधर्व। और हम ये प्रयत्न करते हैं कि देश भर से हम शीर्षस्थ और प्रखर लोगों को बुलाएं, उनको ये स्वतंत्रता देते हैं कि वो अपना विषय स्वयं चुनें। We don't insist that they should have any particular theme to speak on. And this year we already had 3 memorial lectures. The Kumar Gandhar Memorial Lecture given by the Karnataka vocalist T.M. Krishna. Manikaul Memorial Lecture delivered by Rashmi Dorai Swami. Which was the third one? I don't remember. Anyway. So the third one has also taken place. Daya Krishna Memorial Lecture was delivered by Pratap Bhanu Mehta. And we have the honor today of having Professor Hiren Gohain, who's going to speak, as you know, on intercultural communication and the role of translation. Now, although he had freely chosen the theme for himself, it so happens that 2 of the words used in this, communication and translation, were also concerns of Agyeya. उन्होंने संप्रेषण पर पूरा एक शिविर ही किया था और स्वयं बड़े भारी अनुवादक थे। उन्होंने गोरा का बंगला से अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद किया था। जैनेन्द्र कुमार के त्यागपत्र का हिंदी से अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद किया था। जहाँ तक मुझे याद आता है उन्होंने कुछ पूर्वी यूरोपीय देशों के किसी कथानक का या किसी का भी अनुवाद किया था और अनुवाद पर उनका विशेष बल भी था। बल्कि उनके ही समय से कम हिंदी में बहुत सारे सृजनात्मक लेखकों की कीर्ति में ये जुड़ना शुरू हुआ कि इन्होंने अनुवाद भी किया है। यानी रघुवीर सहाय ने, श्रीकांत वर्मा ने, धर्मवीर भारती ने, विजय देवनारायण शाही ने, इन सब ने अनुवाद किया और ये बात उनके जीवन वृत्त में और कार्य वृत्त में विशेष उल्लेखनीय रही है। So we have Dr. Hiren Gohain, who is one of the very celebrated academics. He was my classmate. That is not the reason for his celebration, being celebrated. He was the most outstanding student of that year, and he remained an outstanding student for nearly more than 2 decades. But apart from having studied and becoming a scholar in English literature, he also became an important critical, radical voice in Assamese literature and culture. And therefore, he has not exactly remained confined to the world of academics. He has also moved out without deserting the academics into areas of social action and at least raising a very sharp, candid, courageous, critical voice in Assam. So that's how we invited. The first lecture in this series was delivered by Sitanshu Yashas Chandra, the Gujarati poet, and today we have Professor Hiren Gohain. So may I invite Professor Hiren Gohain. And We are particularly grateful that he has come here in spite of the fact that he is not having the best of health. I mean the physical health. As for his mental health, I think there's no problem. You would have by this time realized that my friend Ashok has the generosity to speak about me in superlative terms. And what can I say in response to that? As Mark Twain has said about reports of his death, the reports of my death are highly exaggerated. This is the kind of thing that I probably would have to say in self-defense. Now, my subject today is intercultural communication and translation as a mode of communication. Nearly half a century ago, my friend Ashok Vajpayee had taken me, fledgling lecturer in a college in Delhi then, to a literary gathering and presented me before S.H. Vatsayan or Agyeya to take his pen name. I became tongue-tied with a combination of awe and embarrassment. The stately, handsome man had towered over me, looked down at me with frank, affectionate interest. It was not an impersonal friendliness and courtesy, which I didn't understand at the time. Much later, I stumbled upon the fact that he had spent quite a few years in Assam during his younger days and had been charmed and fascinated by her then unspoiled natural scenery, her simple, warm-hearted folks, and her rich folk culture. In fact, he had written quite a number of essays and sketches on his experiences in Assam in Hindi with the excitement of discovery. We in Assam owe it out to ourselves to pay back a little of the debt to him. These days, one hears a lot about the differences that distinguish every culture, indeed every part of it, and the inevitable pluralistic perception it enforces on every observer. Of late, it has dawned upon some that the results of such a view have not been very happy. It might almost be said that in this die-hard insistence on difference, even Indians have grown strangers to one another. And this mentality has at times led to deadly outbreaks of unfeeling violence and savage hatred, which blot out the very idea of common culture and humanity. It is time we started pondering over the necessity of communication among different regional and national cultures, which will hopefully promote the growth of national and international community, respectively, in a substantial sense, and will sustain unity in diversity. This phrase, unity in diversity, is not a fable concocted by early 20th century Indian nationalists. It has been a concrete, if somewhat ineluctable process. Time was when both Buddhism and Jainism had been popular religions in South India, though there are hardly any outward traces left today. Again, during the heyday of the great Bhakti movement, it was a popular saying in the north that Bhakti had its origin in the south, in the Dravida country. The same poets and musicians of the broad-based movement used to travel frequently to distant regions. It has been recently found that Eknath of Maharashtra had spent 7 years in a place in Punjab.
Sri Shankardeva in Assam roamed for 12 years all over eastern and northern India, drinking in the refreshing currents of bhakti culture. Critic numbers was surprised to discover among the unlettered folks of Chhattisgarh the verses of Kabir circulating orally. In late Middle Ages, Brajabuli had become almost a common literary language in eastern India, according to the erudite Sukumar Sen, though each region had its own specific form of Brajabuli. I need hardly add more examples of coexistence, communication, intercourse and commonality among proudly distinct regional cultures of India. And all of them thrived on such communication, which in turn was dialogic, dependent on choice, interrogation and reception. To deny and renounce this heritage today would amount to perversion, which Tagore had ascribed to arrogant exclusiveness. The attraction of insularity is being increasingly reinforced by two seemingly opposed tendencies that are sweeping over us like thunderous surges. The regional cultures that had withstood the onslaught of colonialism seem to be coming apart at the seams and observing in confusion their secure identities getting dissolved in outbursts of aggressive ethnic and caste identities, turning from legitimate assertion to ugly intolerance. The exaltation in parading distinct styles of singing, dancing, handicrafts and cuisine are often accompanies an intense sensitiveness that might at the slightest provocation erupt into acts of murder and arson. At the same time, like a vast deluge, a global, largely Anglophone, heavily commercialized culture is setting us adrift with an expanding market for a bizarre variety of standardized cultural commodities, songs and dances, costumes and fashions, models and brands, politically correct ideas and flexible loyalties, facile attitudes and relativized values. All our precious heritage is being sucked in and remade in its own image, imposing upon us casual and mechanical uniformity under the veneer of rich diversity. No doubt there is a touch of universality in all this, but the universality seems to lack depth and genuine substance. Such a scenario does not indicate what we would call communication between cultures. It either makes our souls shrivel up into strips of plastic or expand like balloons in a fairground. It seems as though such trends are unable to bring to birth new enduring human values and extend our given mental horizons as the great religions and ideologies did in their time, overcoming barriers of intense custom and blind tradition. I do not think this is an intolerant diatribe on my part. I happen to feel many sensitive people share my concern and sense of loss, but we also believe gentle and creative, nourishing communication is possible and vital among cultures, but the atmosphere that sustains such communication is lacking today. Consider the immense number of books being translated from Indian regional literatures among one another under the auspices of the Sahitya Academy and the National Book Trust. They do not seem to be read widely, and they have not contributed much to the understanding among regional societies. The translator actually translates from English translations of the original books, and the translations do not involve patient and painstaking study of the language of the original. During the heyday of the freedom movement, contacts and national communications were more difficult than today. Yet translations among Indian languages had at that time more genuineness and depth, as the translations have grappled with the original texts in their respective languages. But there are instances from the past when translations were made from one language into another, overcoming immense cultural distance and obstacles. We have before us the translations of Buddhist Sanskrit classics by Tibetan and Chinese translators. A most remarkable example is that of Al-Biruni, the 10th century Arabic scholar who had accompanied Mahmud of Ghazni during his rapacious raids, but who had devoted himself to a close study of Hindu religion and culture. I am not referring here to his well-known compendium, India, Al-Hind, where he tries to give an objective picture of Indian life, sciences and thought. In 1956, there appeared a European scholarly study of Al-Biruni's translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. For reasons unknown to me, as I am ignorant of Arabic, Al-Biruni chose to call it Kitab Patanjal. Apparently, he had also translated from Sanskrit a treatise on the Samkhya system, which is now lost. Unlike Mahmud's more mundane interests, Al-Biruni was interested in painstaking investigations and understanding of an alien culture. If he had not thought such work valuable, he would have hardly put his hands to them. Paradoxically, the rising influence of Sufism in Mahmud's Ghazni seems to have generated an atmosphere conducive to such liberal interest in metaphysical and spiritual outlook of non-Islamic cultures. Scholars have noted with surprise and admiration Al-Biruni's daring Arabic innovations and extensions of Arabic vocabulary to translate unfamiliar cultural and metaphysical concepts. Thus, the apparent clash of cultures, signified by distinctive plundering raids of Sultan Mahmud, had been accompanied by a serious undercurrent of communications and understanding at a scholarly level and of serious attempts to overcome alienation and to promote an expansion of mental horizons. It might or might not have started a movement in Ghazni, but there is no doubt that what took place in this instance had been a fusion of horizons of the kind which Hans-Georg Gadamer considered the essence of understanding and true communication. Such a fusion of horizons had been possible because both the source language and the target language, to our thinking, the vehicles and reservoirs of customary and potential meanings in both cultures, were creatively tapped to bring about such fusion. In my readings of Gadamer, I haven't come across any explicit discussion of the cultural conditions under which such fusion of horizons take place. But I think it is a pertinent question. Since Gadamer talks about the fusion of horizons that comes about through understanding, he obviously believes in an open-ended tradition. But it is possible to circumscribe the horizons of a culture within rigid limits over which, in the name of tradition, a line of guardians stand guard. They themselves are not receptive to change, but maintain the old tradition in a rigid, systematized form. In such a situation, there is a danger that perceptions and concepts of another culture will appear as absurd, even transgressive, sacrilegious in the perspective of that culture. Rigid orthodoxy prevents extension and enrichment of the culture through fusion of horizons. By the way, Al-Biruni found such a restrictive and censorial outlook among Hindu Orthodox Pandits which he found a matter of regret. But such instances of blocking of communication may be illustrated from fields other than literature. Nobel Prize winning Turkish novelist Orhan Pamuk imaginatively recreates such an encounter between Persian and Turkish painters of the Ottoman Empire and of Europe in his novel My Name is Red. Among the Turkish masters, a minuscule group of artisans feel powerfully drawn towards the beckoning possibilities of the new techniques of the European Renaissance, but they are held back by prejudices of the tradition that rigidly frames the mental horizons accessible to them. Both the cultures in this instance are materially rich and artistically sophisticated. The novel is a thriller, a story of a murdering artist who, unbalanced mentally by the opposite poles of the two cultures, takes to murdering secretly other artists of his fraternity. The artists, book illustrators, illuminators, miniaturists, patronized by the Ottoman Sultan, were devout upholders of a vision of art as a reflection of Allah's timeless creation, where the essence of each object, each species of life is portrayed in a stylized manner, acquired through rigorous, punishing discipline, and where perfection is achieved through the imitation of the ideal essence of things as Allah had created them in His timeless world. Instead, the strenuous pursuit of such essences through art in the portrayal of man and beast, flowers and trees, love and cruelty, battles and tragedies, brings the artist towards the end of his life to a point of physical blindness, when he sees things only with the inner eye and unshakable memory. Countless legends circulate about the brilliance and immense devotion of such artists who hold the mirror up to the Allah's timeless world. With increasing trade and contact with the West, for example, Venetians and Franks, these traditional Islamic painters are confronted by a dramatically opposed school of painting inspired by European humanism. Rather than imitate the timeless essences of God's creation in their original form, they seek to humanize them, reduce them to the human dimension. In their parlance, the Turkish artists say that these Westerners paint things not as they are seen, but as they are looked at. And they are horrified by such flagrant defiance of the divine ordering of the world, where timeless ideas transcend transient and passing looks or individual roles of mortal objects and human beings. Likewise, they are outraged by the ideas of cultivation of individual styles by artists who in their pride would have signature markings on their works. But a section of these artists are secretly intrigued and powerfully drawn to the adventurous techniques of the West, even though it fills them with dread and guilt. Even the Sultan has a book secretly prepared for him, illustrating his life and exploits, introducing these new elements in a new setting. He entrusts the work to a master in his confidence, who gets the work done in numerous bits and pieces by expert artists who have no idea of the whole. The name of the master is Eniste Effendi. But rumors get around about the project, and the resultant tensions drive one of the perceptive participants over the edge of sanity. He murders a fellow artist, remains unsuspected, then begins to seek the company of Eniste Effendi, in charge of the project, tries to draw him out, and in the end murders the poor old man. In his debate with him, Eniste Effendi's words, laden with experience and insight, boldly defends the mingling of the two traditions. Nothing is pure, said Enişte Efendi. In the realm of book arts, whenever a masterpiece is made, whenever a splendid picture makes my eye water out of joy, cause a chill to run down my spine, I can be certain of the following. Two styles heretofore never brought together have come together to create something new and wondrous. Today, if men cannot adequately praise the book arts workshop, today, if men cannot adequately praise the book arts workshop of Akbar Khan of Hindustan, it is because he urged his miniaturists to adopt the styles of the Frankish masters. To God belongs East and West. May He protect us from the will of the pure and unadulterated. To no avail, the painter-murderer grasses his skull with a heavy metal inkpot, inwardly deeply disturbed by the tension between his burgeoning ambition and the pressure of tradition. This takes place against the religious background where Orthodox Islamic preachers, rebelling against the new stirrings of artistic creativity and thinking, curse and denounce them and create a sort of panic among the multitudes, which fill with shame and guilt all those patronizing artists whose interests are aroused by the new styles of painting. Thus, there was no scope for a free, open, true communication between the two cultures. Let us pause for a moment and ask why. Because communication is associated with what Gadamer calls understanding. And such understanding comes when the human soul, which is bound to look for direction and principles, is not imprisoned by creed, by doctrinal shackles, and has an innocent appreciation of what it finds in the world in which it is situated. And as Enişte Efendi says in his novel, out of such spontaneous interest and appreciation, an intimate dialogue takes place between souls and understanding follows, which is not a slavish imitation of an alien culture, but a fusion of two horizons that had till then been apart. In literature and translation, the process is inseparable from language, which is the mode of man's primary encounters with the world of men and things. In my last example, I come to literature and translation. The key figure here is Rabindranath Tagore, who was both a devoted patriot and an ardent advocate of international understanding and intercultural communication. His own English translation of Gitanjali may serve as some kind of illustration of what I am getting at. As he was writing the poems for an audience largely ignorant of India's natural scenery, traditions and thought. Yet this translation had a profound and widespread impact on Western audiences all over Europe and Americas. I'm intrigued by the fact that William Radich, who has translated it afresh after a gap of 100 years, considers the first published Gitanjali not only erroneous but misleading. Indeed, in his introduction, he calls it a betrayal of Tagore's true self. I am quoting him, within quotes, betrayal of Tagore's true self. Quoting Tagore to reveal his growing unease with the version in print. Radich seems to hold the editing of W.B. Yeats as mainly responsible for the fundamental distortion. Yet, the Rodenstein manuscript, which he considers closer to the original, differs from the printed version only in spacing out the compact poetic composition into several paragraphs and a few punctuation marks here and there. There is reason to think that he bases his argument on the evidence of W.B. Yeats's well-known preface, which at first blush seems in places far-fetched and widely speculative. It is significant that whatever were Tagore's early worries, he paid tribute to Tagore Yeats in a mature and considered opinion much later, in a letter dated 26 November 1932. I am quoting him. Thus came those delightful days when I worked with Yeats, and I'm sure the magic of his pen helped my English to attain some quality of permanence. Quotation ends. It is difficult to square this with Radish's claim that the published Gitanjali is in many respects a betrayal of what Tagore originally had in mind. Radish, however, finds Tagore's English Gitanjali as an on the whole inadequate and unsatisfactory rendering of the much richer and more complex original Bengali poems, allegedly further distorted by Yeats's editing, and launches his own attempt to find a more satisfactory equivalent of Tagore's poetry into English. For him, the Bengali text is something that is objective in a fixed, determinate way. It is as if, in discovering it, we can present it as an object outside us, an object that we can temporarily transfer to a different language without much change. It seems to us, on the other hand, that the Bengali texts are discovered by us through a Gadamarian process of understanding. They are revealed to us as we approach them with certain prior assumptions, which are gradually modified as we try to become more intimate with them. These texts do not pre-exist in some transcendent objects which we then possess intellectually. They take shape as our attempts to unconceal them play on with what tends to remain hidden. Translation is so intimately related to such understanding that it is an art and cannot be reduced to science by sophisticated technical procedures. The act of translation requires us to form a personal involvement in terms of fidelity, trust, and insight. Even for Tagore himself, the understanding of his own Bengali poems as he renders them into English has a similar character. They come into being as with his own frame of mind at the time he seeks to discover their shape. Certain mental conditions, presuppositions, put him in communion with them, help him to render them into English in the way he understands them. Hence, though apparently different in pretty obvious ways from Bengali texts, and also strikingly different from trends in English poetry at the time, his English renderings may be read as products of his dialogue between himself, as he had grown into at the time, out of interaction with various cultural and poetic traditions that shaped the horizon of his mind, including some from the West and poems in Bengali before him. The peculiarities of the English version that so appealed to the European readers of the time, the rhythmic biblical prose that yet had a singular intimacy of tone, a combination of innocence and subtlety, of familiarity to sublimity, actually emerged out of the process of understanding. Rather than dismissing them as betrayal of some pristine textual intuitions, we shall do better to attend to how they came about and took shape. A reflection on such understanding can never be complete, and we may hazard some conjectures with appropriate evidence. What one misses most in Radish's translation, which he claims is closer to the real Gitanjali, real again within quotes, than the poems translated by Tagore and edited by Yeats, is a sense of subdued rapture pervading even poems of pathos and sorrow. Radice suggests perhaps it has got something to do with Leela, which is a profound Indian Hindu concept of God's role in the world. Uh, Radice suggests that Tagore's own translations missed out a lot in the original because he is guided by certain preconceptions about English poetry. For example, he avoided rich eloquence of Bengali originals in his English translation. And since these poems about this life and this world were colored by a profound sense of the sacred and the eternal, he must have thought it appropriate to emulate the rhythm of biblical prose. Radice, I hope I pronounced his name correctly.
I hope so.
Radice rejects those preconceptions and goes for a full-fledged rendering of what strikes him as the essential, inalienable qualities of the original Bengali poems. Thus, there is no true connection, but a dogmatic theory that robs the poems of their magic. In fact, Radice's translation, by contrast, show what a memorable classic Tagore's rendering had been and still is. Tagore's choices, presumably encouraged by Yeats, remind us of Gadamer's notion that translator is compelled to foreground something and ignore others in the source text. For example, in the celebrated poem Where the Mind is Without Fear, Tagore omits the line about God chastising his listless and abject countrymen of his time out of the stupor with ruthless blows. Niz hate niddoy aghat hani. This is the line that Tagore omits, but Radice seizes upon. But the Lord is invoked in the English poem as benign and all-powerful, compassionate, but beyond all humanizing touch. Hence, the sudden appearance of a chastising taskmaster or a paterfamilias who administer blows to bring the wretches to their senses would appear quite inappropriate. Radice translated as pitiless blows and so on. Further in the same poem, Radice finds faults with the line, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand, because in idiomatic English it should have been lost its way in, etc., etc. In the poem, the word into is repeated several times, as in, when the world has not broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, or as in the triumphant last line, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my countrymen awake. So the inner rhyming, I think the inner repetition rather, is important. There is thus poetic logic behind the slight deviation from normal idiomatic English. Next, I should like to consider the translation of one of Tagore's best known lyrics or songs, Jibon Jokhon Shukaye Jai Koruna Dharai Eso. Tagore had translated these initial lines as follows: When the heart is hard and pursed up, come upon me with a shower of mercy. And Radice starts with the following lines in his version: When the life in me dries up, come with a stream of kindness. Is it any improvement upon Tagore? I think no. First, kindness is daya, not karuna, and sense of the letter is better conveyed by the word mercy. More importantly, Radice misses the hidden metaphor behind the words. It is a metaphor from the rhythm of India's cycle of seasons. The coming of the rainy season after the scorching heat of the month of Jyeshtha and We have to remember Tagore's sensibility as deeply embedded in the Indian natural scene. Tagore probably celebrated the Varsha, the rainy season, as often as the Basanto or spring. Radice translates Karuna Dhara as a stream of kindness and is oblivious of how the plentiful showers soak and refresh the hard, parched soil with all signs of vegetative life in its struck earth and soil in a state of death-like stupor. Stream is a stream, but the word dhara in Tagore is associated many times with Brishti dhara, pouring showers of rain. So that, when Tagore translates the line as when the heart is hard and pursed up, come upon me with a shower of mercy, seems to me a much better translation than Radice's one. Then again, in the third stanza, Radice translates, when my miserable mind, huddling in the corner, meanly shuts you out, fling open the door, O generous Lord, and come majestically. The contrast between meanly and generous does not carry over into the word majestically. It all sounds a little abstract. Tagore's much simpler version underlines the contrast in more picturesque and vivid terms. When my beggarly heart sits crouched, shut up in a corner, break open the door, my king, and come with the ceremony of a king. The last instance I am going to cite is Tagore's Jabar Din, Sanchoita, page 511, Gitanjali, poem 96. It is necessary to quote the poem as a whole, in Bengali to bring out the contrast. Jabar dine এই কথাটি বলে যেন যাই, যা দেখেছি যা পেয়েছি তুলনা তার নাই। এই জ্যোতি সমুদ্র মাঝে যে শতদল পদ্মরাজে তারই মধু পান করেছি, ধন্য আমি তাই যাবার দিনে এই কথাটি জানিয়ে যেন যায়। বিশ্বরূপের খেলাঘরে কতই গেলেম খেলে, অপরূপকে দেখে গেলেম দুটি নয়ন মেলে, পরশ যারে কয় না যায় না করা, সকল লেহে দিলেন ধরা, এইখানে শেষ করেন যদি শেষ করে দিন তাই, যাবার বেলা এই কথাটি জানিয়ে যেন যায়। In the Bengali original, notwithstanding the profundity and the breadth of this seminal spiritual idea of the infinite become incarnate, in the forms of the world, forms that are playthings for a divine player, there is a lightness of touch that makes it sound simple and guileless. The words at the same time are imbued with humility. The original English version the original English version by Tagore retains something of the touch, but Radice has the ponderous quality of a public announcement. Let me pronounce these words the day I go. Nothing compares with what I have seen, what I have come to know. Compare the original Gitanjali. When I leave from hence, let this be my parting words, that what I have seen is unsurpassable. Compared to its light, pithiness. Compared to its light pithiness, Radhice's transdiction appears prolix. The poem is complete in 2 stanzas. In the first stanza, the first and final line echo each other, a refrain with a minor variation. The words Jabar Dine are left unchanged. In the last line of the second stanza, however, Jabar Dine becomes Jabar Bela. The variation here is poetically meaningful. The first refrain invokes the day of parting as a day in the future, vague and uncertain. But in the last refrain, the parting is more concretely felt as some kind of imminent farewell of leave-taking, where the Bengali word Bela is more appropriate. Tagore avoids the words day of parting altogether. But Radhice uses it prominently and misses the contrast between the 2 lines of two different occasions of parting. These are little touches but telling. Towards the end of my talk, I come to Radhice's extremely severe strictures on the purported editor of the first published version of English Gitanjali, W.B. Yeats. He accuses Yeats of radically misunderstanding Tagore's intentions, which on his view were made into a travesty by Yeats's emendations. The available evidence of the extent of Yeats's revisions is scanty, but Radhice seizes upon Yeats's introduction as flagrant proof of his guilt. To be sure, Yeats seems to hold an opinion on the character of Tagore's poetry that on the face of it is absurd and far-fetched. The offending lines are as follows. I am quoting from that passage quoted by Radhice himself from Yeats's introduction. The work of a supreme culture, these poems yet appear as much the growth of a common soil as the grass and the rushes. A tradition where poetry and religion are the same thing has passed through centuries, gathering from learned and unlearned metaphors and emotions, and carried back again to the multitudes the thought of the scholar and the noble. Now, Radhice thought it a surprisingly naive, supremely naive misconception. According to him, Yeats was ignorant, I am quoting from Radhice, ignorant of the sophisticated hybrid culture of 19th century Bengal from which Tagore stemmed. What was the prejudgment which, according to Gadamer, is so essential to opening the closed doors of understanding in Yeats's appraisal of Tagore? Actually, Yeats at that time was a fervent believer in the close links between the folk poet or singer and the common people in Irish folk society. For example, Yeats himself records how he stood at Douglas Hyde's side and listened to Galway mowers in the field singing Hyde's love songs of Connaught, singing his Gaelic words without their knowing whose words they sang. He compared that experience with his belief that it is so in India, whose peasants sing the words of the great poet of Bengal without knowing whose words they sing. Indeed, in connection with Tagore's poetry, he had remarked elsewhere, to turn to the east, moreover, was not to lose oneself in foreignness, but rather to see the reflection of one's own past. In the context of Tagore's poetry, these ideas are misplaced. But is it possible that Tagore himself had supplied a stimulus to this turn in Yeats's thought? Indeed, we have to emphasize here Tagore's own abiding affiliation to folk music and poetry, on which Radice speaks not a word in his 86-page introduction. It is indeed strange, as it is something of an old hat among Tagore scholars. Tagore was a strong believer in the universality of poetry, of the poet's language. In his Sadhana, published in the same year as Gitanjali, 1913, he had this to say: "A poet is a true poet when he can make his personal idea common to all men, which he could not do if he had not a medium common to all his audience. This common language has its own laws, which a poet must discover and follow." This recalls his profound admiration and extensive assimilation of the heritage of bauls, itinerant folk singers of Bengal, whose songs combine plain diction with spiritual insight and profound metaphysical ideas. He found in their songs the fruition of the joint endeavor of Hindu and Muslim saint poets for centuries, overcoming, not abolishing differences in a true revelation of spiritual commonality. This, in his words, in the words of Tagore, evoked songs of untutored sweetness in language and melody. English writings of Rabindranath Tagore, edited by S.K. Das. One of the unmistakable sources of lyric melody of many of the poems of Gitanjali were the songs of bauls, like Lalan Shah, whose work he tried to have recorded by his friend Kitty Mohan Sen, and make known to a wider educated audience. He also personally knew another baul, Gogon Harkara, who had sung the lines that echoed and re-echoed in Tagore's mind. Ami kothai pabo tare, amar moner manush jere. The idea of the moner manush appears several times in Tagore's poetry. Tagore found in their poetry, again I am quoting from him, earthiness sublimated by emotional sincerity and an intense feeling of love. This is again from English writings of Rabindranath Tagore, edited by S.K. Das, Professor S.K. Das. His acquaintance with baul songs and his assimilation of their form and content had taken place at Silaida, 1878-1901, one of the intensely creative periods of his life. Significantly found these songs of illiterate singers, products of the high culture of India. Again, I am quoting the words high culture from Tagore himself. Outside the ken of the modern schoolmaster and college professor, again from Tagore. Ironically, William Radice unknowingly joins that motley group of schoolmasters and professors in his obliviousness of the influence of the bauls on Rabindranath. On the other hand, an American scholar, Edward C. Dimmock, had called Tagore the greatest of the bauls of Bengal in an essay published in 1959, November, in the Journal of Asian Studies, Ann Arbor, Michigan. Thus, whatever its real or supposed deficiencies, the original published English version of Gitanjali continues to hold its ground. If my personal bias is forgiven, I would like to say that whatever errors and deviations from the original may be discovered in Edward Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat in Umar Khayyam. No other translation of those Rubaiyat has yet surpassed it in beauty and pathos. I have outlined above the challenges and pitfalls of translation as intercultural communication, but this approach seems to me to discover and reveal insights lost to the so-called hermeneutics of suspicion. Thank you.
Usually after memorial lectures there are no questions, but Dr. Gohain has agreed to entertaining some questions, and therefore you're welcome.
Provided they are not too difficult.
And also provided they're briefly stated. Yes, go ahead.
Professor Gohain, I'm Chandra Mohan. I'm meeting you after about
Yes.
30 years.
Decades, yes.
Chandra, my is a very brief query. Out of the two situations, one, as you have mentioned, Tagore translating his Gitanjali and other things, other writers himself. Second, by another. Do you, in the intercultural context, communication context, do you think author has more authority on it, or we should be swayed by the critic?
That's a tough one. As a witness to the intentions of the poet. That's all.
No, but it doesn't satisfy us, because when Dr. Radha Krishnan translated Upanishads and sent the text to Tagore, he said, "My dear friend, I must tell you that you have translated it in intercultural context for the Western reader. Therefore, it is okay. I approve it."
No, I don't get your point actually.
My point is that when the author has a particular audience, and as we feel, it was the Radhakrishnan has audience, Western audience, therefore he translated Upanishads for them. And similarly, Tagore also had a Western audience, and also Yeats wrote a wonderful, because we are enabled by Yeats' preface written to it. But when Radice comes, we all get somehow disturbed.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it is a what you have said about Tagore's opinion of Radhakrishnan translation. Well, I don't think Tagore's own translation belongs to the same kind of mechanical adaptation to the West. It is an actual fusion of horizons, as Hans-Georg Gadamer would have said. There is nothing mechanical about it. He was not particularly thinking of the Western audience. He had immersed himself not only in Indian tradition, but opened himself up to the tradition of the West. So this is a fusion, not a mechanical adaptation.
May I mention two interesting points here. One, that Tagore also published in 1914 100 poems of Kabir.
Yes, indeed.
And they were all
along with Ibn Underhill.
Yeah, Kshiti Mohan Sen had collected them and he translated them. And actually, Kabir got through to the world through these translations. For the first time, the Western world came to know of Kabir, and then his translations were retranslated into Polish, into French, into many European languages. There is a scholar in Belgium, he's a Bhakti scholar, called Willem Calvert. And he developed, earlier on it was believed that Kabir's first written texts were included in the Guru Granth Sahib. That therefore, before that, there is no written script. But Willem Calvert discovered there were 4 more and pre-Guru Granth Sahib. They were found in Rajasthan, libraries in Bikaner or wherever. So he developed a 5-star system, because there has been a lot of controversy about the authenticity of Kabir. So he made a 5-star system. If a pad finds place in all the 5 manuscripts, it is very authentic, and thereby like. By that procedure, he found only one of the poems included by Rabindranath is authentic. The 99, right? But that of course brings you the other question, because the notion of authenticity itself is under some kind of an assault here, because there was a tradition in which anybody who will write in that strain could add. Kumar Gandhar used to sing a lot of Kabir, which I once told him, they are not in the Bijak. He said, I don't sing Bijak, I sing what people sing. The rather out-of-date English of Rabindranath Tagore's translations, so he picked up 46 and improved their English. He had no access to the
I have not read them, so I don't know if they're a real improvement or not.
Well, I mean, I'm saying that this attempt to keep on insisting raises an intercultural communication problem, that you don't know the language.
Yeah.
Rabindranath knew the language and translated.
Yeah.
Robert Blythe says, I don't know the language, I'm only improving the English. Now, in the case of William Radici, he knows Bengali language. No, he's been teaching.
He might have known, but he has missed many of the nuances as I have so demonstrated.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you wanted to say.
So my question is, that since you have laid so much of stress on Radice, was it his failure as intercultural communicator, or he was an inept translator? Because what happens is, this was the original was published 100 years ago, and as Ashokji also mentioned, there is always a change in lingo after a certain point of time, and you need to address your audience. So where is that? Because from your lecture, I couldn't make out what was Radice's failure.
Radice's failure has less to do with the distance in time than with failure to understand the metaphors and the figurative language of Tagore. Because Radice was inadequately acquainted with the sensibility of Tagore to India's natural scenery. You know, I have mentioned the line about the showers of Varsa, soaking and refreshing the almost dead earth, heated up by the warm summer, isn't it? He has completely missed the metaphor. So it is not simply, no, this is because the failure here actually comes from his lack of acquaintance with the Indian natural scene. Likewise, his lack of acquaintance with the bhakti tradition in Indian popular culture must have led to his missing that point in Tagore's translation. You see, I mean, his failure as a translator is deeply related to his inadequate study of the background. Radice is a bookish sort of scholarly sort of person and hardly a poet.
So you can say perhaps that there is an intercultural communication failure.
Yeah.
Yes. That's it. Yes. Any guess?
Hi, my name is. We have had that the importance of having appropriate translation tools like lexicons, which are accurate, which are intercultural, which are bilingual, maybe trilingual, which can truly help any translator to bridge these intercultural gaps. For example, a good lexicon, a good thesaurus would have easily told the gentleman the difference between karuna and daya, or even the metaphors which exist in a culture.
Now, about karuna and daya, I am prepared to accept your line of poetry. That's a quite different situation.
Okay, I accept that, but many aspects of a culture can be intrinsic in a work of lexicography. And I'll write you a mail, Ashokji, emphasizing this point and giving you examples from my father's work.
Okay.
I'll do that tomorrow or day after.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, I have another question.
Harish, let Harish.
Hiren, that was utterly delightful. You know, the passion and the fervor with which you laid into William Radice was a great source of joy. I mean, you took us back to the days when Ashok and you were classmates. And also, I think one other source of incidental joy was, I thought that Assamese did not like Bengalis.
Not even Hindi.
But you are a greater devotee of Tagore in every which way than most Bengalis. But I thought to ask you some kind of a question.
Harish, I would say that any educated Indian must, I repeat, must have some respect for Tagore.
Yes, of course.
His vision,
Yes.
his understanding of India is just profound.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The question that I have in mind is, while you were talking about Tagore's own translation and the seeming errors in it, while it was very effective in communicating whatever he wished to communicate, and the proof was in the pudding. He won the Nobel, he became international, he became a sage all over the Western world. In the end, you know, you made the comparison that was running in my own mind throughout your lecture with the Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam. It's been demonstrated that they are a translator's construction, Fitzgerald's construction, and any reference to the original is perhaps unnecessary and unjustified because they are autonomous. If Tagore's own translation of his poems is autonomous, then where does translation come into it? I'll just add one more remark for you to comment on. Edward Thompson, who wrote 2 books on Tagore, 2 early books, he also learned some Bengali. He had some Bengali. He pointed out to Tagore over and over again that when Tagore translated into English, according to Thompson, he mixed the wine of Bengali with the water of Western English expectation. And Tagore said to Thompson, "You are absolutely right. I should not have written anything in English. When I write in English, I use a counterfeit coin."
No, Harish, I am particularly keen on the Gitanjali because that is a classic. It's an English translation of Gitanjali. The other translations of Tagore do not come up to scratch compared to Gitanjali, and I think they are forgettable. But Gitanjali, maybe because of BHS supervision, maybe because there is no evidence that he did anything about it, seems to me really a supreme classic. As I have shown, between Radice's translator, which is painstakingly literal.
Yes.
There is no life in it.
Yes.
It is mechanical, dull.
Well, what's the comparison between Tagore and Radice in stature and success? And he is, you said he was a motley crowd of college professors, schoolmasters. Well, he is a professor of Bengali at London. So, and we are all, so many of us are professors. So am I. Part of that motley crowd. We are all
The
mechanical.
lady there wanted to ask, here, Harish, could you pass it on?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't want to intervene in any of these very intricate issues of translation and how Yeats might compare Yeats's translation and the preface might compare with William Radice's. But I was just wondering, and this is really not a query, I was just wondering that given that we are also trying to look at translators and translations and the original through a span of, a time, and which is diachronic. And we are looking also at time lapses. I was just wondering, is it possible that one can also view translation, despite the fact that poetry and translations remain a very sacrosanct exercise, and one is always worried about being loyal to the original, but could one also look at translations as transcreations, and every every translation as yet another new poem?
You see, to fall back on Gadamer again, the true translation really brings about a fusion of horizons. So that life breathes to it. Whereas, for example, Radice is a contemporary. He uses contemporary English. That doesn't make him at all better than the earlier version by Tagore himself. Why? Because in the case of Radice, there is no fusion of horizons. There is no fusion of horizons. There is no understanding of the original. And as Gadamer had emphasized in his various writings on translation, the translator may not be able to grasp the original, elusive original wholly, but he must study the background of the poet and the work as thoroughly as possible in order to immerse himself in it, so that his mental horizon and that of the poem or the poet can come together.
Yes, that's the last one.
Yes.
So what is the situation in Assam as regards translations? Because you don't like Bengali, you don't like Hindi. And I ask this question because almost a quarter of a century ago, it was Professor Gohain article against me, dubbing me as a Hindi expansionist, which let loose alpha on me.
Alpha on you?
Yes.
They sent you a note or something?
Oh yes, I was threatened in my office.
My God.
And anyway, he was kind enough, because when I met him subsequently, he recanted his article.
No,
He was kind enough to do that. But sir, that apart, sir, my question is, what is the situation? How does Assam take translations?
You take your first point first.
What is your name? What is your name?
Sudhir Tandon.
Sudhir Tandon.
You see, I make a distinction between lover of Hindi and the Hindu expansionist. Hindi expansionist. The Hindi expansionist is a political fellow. Whereas a true Hindi writer or a true Hindi lover of Hindi won't be an expansionist. We have to live together in India as Assamese, Bengalis, Oriyas, whatnot. So that sort of mutual tolerance and give and take, that's a different matter from expansionism. Expansionism is there, as all my friends, including Bajpayee, would agree. And these fellows are politicians. They are not under the garb of literary fellows. And as for the other question, what was that?
So what is the situation as far as translation is concerned in Assam?
I am afraid the situations are not very helpful, because under the tide of globalization, people are not concerned with any language at all except English. There has been such an overwhelming influence of globalization and its accompanying commodified culture which is Anglophone, that people have ceased to bother about their native languages. There are many schools in Assam where Assamese kids are not taught Assamese, but only English. I am profoundly uneasy about this situation. I think in here, Hindi should be taught, not English. English can be and should be a second language, but the first language, the primary language should be Hindi. This kind of situation is taking place all over India, and this is bad enough, I think, for the future of Indian culture as a whole. India survives, as the saying goes, as a unity in diversity. When you forget the diversity, you destroy the unity.
Well, with these words, we come to the end of this evening. On behalf of the Raza Foundation and my own behalf, I thank Professor Gohain for having given a very thought-provoking, as they say, lecture, and for all of you who have listened to him. Thank you very much.